Hello and welcome to the online launch and panel discussion for In Defense of Common Life, the political thought of Raquel Gutiérrez Aguilar. On behalf of Ana Martina at the Making Worlds Cooperative Bookstore in Philadelphia and myself, Malav Knuga, the publisher of Common Notions, we are honored to publish and promote the writings of Raquel Gutiérrez, whose exemplary life and political thought reveals the essential coordinates of what struggles for autonomy, dignity, and self-determination mean from a perspective rooted in territory, self-governance, relations of care intertwined in rebellion and shared sovereignty, and born of internationalism. The book is also an occasion for us to renew our commitment to learning from the struggles and of publishing as a means of building infrastructure and relationships for the circulation and connection of different popular movements arrayed against colonial, state, capitalist, and patriarchal power. In addition to Brian Whitener, the book's editor, we'd like to extend our gratitude to the book's translator, J.D. Plucker. On that note, I'm delighted to welcome alongside Raquel Gutiérrez and Brian Whitener, our panelists today, Magalí Rabasa, Dawn Marie Paley, and Conor Tomás Reed, comrades whose writings, grassroots research and journalism, and participation in movements across the hemispheres, and whose contributions in their circulation and critical connection have taught us a lot over the last many years, in which resistance and refusal to colonial state violence and neoliberal rule in the Americas has also revealed beautiful experiments in autonomy. And before I hand things off to Brian to welcome and more fully introduce Raquel and the other panelists, I'd like to mention also that Brian has been an important facilitator, collaborator, and translator of these types of exchanges. And he embodies these principles in the translation and writing work he undertakes, both at Common Notions and several other book projects we've had the honor of working with him on, as well as his most recent anthology, Abolish Borders, now out from Pluto Press, and his research and pedagogy at the University of Buffalo. So that's by way of a little bit of a bio to Brian and his critical work. One final note, we'll aim to take questions in the chat at the tail end of the event, but please do post those questions and comments as they arise throughout the panel discussion. We'll be looking out for them and we'll be eager to engage with them. And now I'll hand things off to you, Brian.
Wonderful, Malav. Thank you so much. Thanks to everyone who's joining us tonight for the launch of this incredible book and a celebration of the work of, for me, one of the most important contemporary political thinkers. And in addition to that, just an excellent all-around human being, Raquel Gutiérrez Aguilar. This is the book here, In Defense of Common Life. And I just want to say a quick thank you to Malav and to Ana Martina and to everyone at Common Notions and Making Worlds for all their support of this project. I want to say a thank you to J.D. Plucker for a beautiful, gorgeous translation. You should be able to see their website. They are an incredible longtime translator of Latin American literature and other textual objects into English, and also a brilliant poet and artist as well. So please check out their website. And also, I just want to say thanks to Josh McPhee for this absolutely gorgeous book cover, and just incredible. So thank you so much, Josh, for all your work. And to thanks as well to our speakers tonight. We're joined, as Malav said, by Dawn Marie Paley, Magalí Rabasa, and Conor Coco Tomás Reed. And I'm going to serve kind of as the MC tonight. I'm the editor of the volume, but tonight I'm going to hand over some of the speaking and framing duties to these wonderful comrades who have taken time out of their day to join us here tonight to talk a little bit about some of the things that they have found in Raquel's work, and some of the things that could be important for our thinking in different kinds of organizing contexts and different kinds of political conversations that we are having and will be having and need to be having in the future. So the format for the event tonight is we're going to allow each of our speakers to weigh in a little bit on the book, and then we'll have give Raquel a chance for a more extended speech or discourse on the comments, and then also just on the project itself and her work more generally. And then we'll open things up to questions throughout the event. If you have something you would like to ask, please put it into the comments that you'll see somewhere on your screen, and we will collate those and ask those questions of the panelists and of Raquel when we get to the end of the event. So I'd like to hand things off right now to our first speaker, who is Dawn Marie Paley, who is an investigative journalist and also editor of Ojala.mx or Ojala.mx. She's the author of Drug War Capitalism and Guerra Neoliberal, Desaparición en Búsqueda en el Norte de México. Dawn, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thanks so much for having me, and thanks everyone for being here. It's a total pleasure to be celebrating the translation of more of Raquel's work into English. We were joking with Raquel when we first got the first version of the cover that she's entered the canon through this translation, and I think very well deserved. I'll just add to my bio. Thanks very much, Brian, for that. That I've known Raquel for, I guess, a little bit more than 10 years. I did my PhD in Puebla, Mexico, with her, which was an amazing gift. And we co-founded Ojala.mx almost 2 years ago now, as a site for English and Spanish reflection on feminism, on different movements, and also on critiques specifically of the left in power. So if folks are interested in checking out Ojala.mx, that's something that both Raquel and I are putting significant amount of energy into these days. And we featured writing by Magalí and Brian and many others, and of course Raquel and I. So yeah, the book is wonderful. I was looking through it again just before we hopped on this call, and the texts are familiar. They're sort of classic Raquel texts. Obviously, when I studied with her, I was in the seminar Entramados Comunitarios y Formas de lo Político in Puebla for a couple of years. So many of the ideas are familiar to me, but it was a real treat to read the interview that Brian did with Raquel that really shows also, Brian, that you have like forensically read just about everything that she's written. So I really appreciated that interview, because I felt like it brought out new elements. And this, considering like I know Raquel very well and spent a lot of time with her, and I'm still learning new things about different struggles and different reflections on struggles. So I guess the thing that struck me, and that I think is really something that just continuously appears in Raquel's work, both in this book, in other writing, but also just in political practice and in quotidian daily life, is this notion of the production in common of decisions, or the collective production of decisions, or this idea of collective capacities as a practice, as a repertoire that needs to be constantly renewed and engaged, and that in some cases and in some struggles draws upon millennial knowledge, and in other struggles, like for example with Indigenous struggles, right? So it's drawing on forms of decision making that have lasted and resisted so many attempts to undo them, and then other struggles that could be adjacent to Indigenous struggles or separate, distinct from, that also have developed the sort of crucial structuring element of the need to develop these common practices that allow for both collective decision making and the creation and building of collective capacities. I think that's probably for me one of the most important pieces to be thinking through right now, in terms of the need to continue organizing as things inevitably continue to go into the death spiral that we're currently in. I would say both in Mexico, in the United States, and elsewhere. One of the things, Raquel recently has been working and writing about, I mean, not just recently, but recently on Ojala, some of her pieces have been about what's taking place politically in Bolivia. And one of the most interesting reflections there is how having the movement towards socialism in power for almost 20 years, specifically under the caudillo figure of Evo Morales, has actually led to a purposeful destruction of that collective capacity for decision-making by replacing leaders through co-optation, through different forms of demobilization, sometimes through incarceration and violence. And so now this reflection of how in Bolivia, there is a need to reconstruct this collective capacity for decision-making, and how feminists are sort of central in doing some of that work, at least in the urban setting. So I just think it's something super, thinking through that collective production of decisions and how we do that, and how we maintain that over time, and how we continue to revitalize that, is something worth thinking through from whatever context, I guess is what I'm trying to say, whether folks are in Bolivia or in Mexico or in the States. Of course, I have a question for Raquel, because I'm a journalist. I did my PhD, but I never identify as like a sociologist. And I just have like the vicio of always like needing to ask a question no matter what. And one of the things I find so interesting in Raquel's reflection is also her ability to look back and say, I didn't have the words for this at the time, but now I do. And so here's what was happening, and sharing that kind of knowledge with us, like her younger sisters, or in this case, like a wider public. And so one of the questions I would love to just hear from Raquel on is like, what are you sensing right now that you don't have the words for? Like, I'd love to know like what your sense is of like, whether it's struggle or whether it's the political system that we're in, or the political moment that we're in. I know we've talked about this with relation to neoliberalism as well. And you said to me, at the time, we just didn't know we just didn't have the words to describe clearly what was happening. And I'm just curious if there is anything when you're making your talk in just a few moments, that right now is giving you that feeling of, I want to be able to name this, but we don't have the words yet, because that's where our work needs to go as well. And I say this also because I was joking with Raquel recently that she is always taking notes. Like, I can see her right now, like she's writing in her notebook, 100% guaranteed. And she keeps them all. And there's like 40 million volumes. I said she has like the Grundrisse of Raquel Gutierrez's like thoughts. And I think that's part of like the practice that allows to reflect back on stuff that happened so long ago and actually like have it kind of fresh. So just that intellectual practice, and the fact that it's also a practice of everyday life, of how are we making decisions together? How are we coming together as distinct people, recognizing our distinctions, and also finding what unites us to struggle in this moment? So I think I'll leave it there. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Dawn, for that. It was lovely to hear those reflections, and also questions. And just to echo, one of the things that I say in the introduction, is just the importance of Raquel within a Latin American context as a political thinker, as a feminist, as a theorist of autonomy, which for people who perhaps are connected to Latin America and kind of understand in some of those conversations, those things will be obvious, but perhaps for people who are newer to the conversation, the importance of Raquel's work outside of the United States is perhaps not so obvious. And as you're saying, the insistence on the importance of thinking through how practices of autonomy are sustained and can be extended by a thinking through of concrete political realities is very much something that feels so important and so useful in Raquel's work, not just in a Latin American context, but also within a U.S. context as well. And that's really one of the things that was so motivating. It felt like we need this work in a easily accessible format in English and in the United States and in other English-speaking places, so that we can begin to try and assimilate all of these wonderful, as you're saying, the Grundrisse, all of these insights that, there's 40 years or almost 40 years of Raquel's work for us to learn from in order to think through the contemporary problems that we're facing. So I just wanted to just chime in and emphasize, how important that's really one of the motivating things for me here in this volume as well. So I want to turn things over now to Magalí Rabasa, who's a researcher and teacher based in Portland, Oregon. Her first book, The Book and Movement, Autonomous Politics in the Lettered City Underground, came out from Pittsburgh University Press in 2019, and it's in translation as the El Libro en Movimiento, which has come out in, I think, 3 different editions, but if you search for the title, you'll be able to find it online, which is an exploration of print book culture in contemporary Latin American social movements. And she's currently working on a new project examining feminist economies of knowledge in the Americas. Magalí, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks so much, Brian. And a huge thank you to JD for this translation, to Malav and Ana Martina and everyone at Common Notions. It's really an honor to share the space with all of you tonight, or today. It's still daytime in Portland, Oregon. So it's super exciting to see Raquel's work in translation, especially as part of the fantastic publishing work of Common Notions, which I really think of as the parallel in the North to the radical publishing networks that Raquel's work circulates through in the South. And I think that that's really significant here as we're thinking about what it means to be doing this kind of translation work. So I'm going to share a few thoughts, I think, about the significance and I think the urgency of Raquel's work for us here in the North. So first, a little bit about my relationship with Raquel's work. I first encountered her work in 2009 through my friends at Bajo Tierra Ediciones and Mina Lorena Navarro, frequently cited co-thinker of Raquel's. She brought Raquel's work to my attention through the book Los Ritmos del Pachacuti, The Rhythms of Pachacuti, which they had published as one of the first books that Bajo Tierra Ediciones put together. And that is, interestingly, one of Raquel's few works that have been translated into English, published by Duke University Press. And I find this translation far more exciting because of the context of its publication, because I think that publication by a university press, it was missing a little something in terms of its circulation, right? In terms of how it came about. The next book that I encountered was A Desordenar, which I read for the first time as a photocopy of a borrowed book from a friend's bookshelf. At the time, it was hard to find, and it now is much easier to find due to its reedition in a lot of different contexts. So that's something that I'm really pleased to see, and I would love to see that in translation as well. I then began to follow the circulation and reedition of Raquel's work across Latin America as part of my research into the explosion in alternative publishing that occurred alongside the new social movements of the early 21st century. And Raquel dialogues really directly and also indirectly with a lot of the militant theorists whose work I was also following through those networks. And they shared this common concern with the ways that power was being challenged and reimagined in the context of new autonomous politics from El Alto, Argentina, Chiapas, and beyond. But Raquel's keen and sustained attention to the patriarchal ordering of society, and crucially also of our movements, set her apart from the analysis being offered by many of those other militant theorists who, while they were posing important questions about power and autonomy, were often failing to see and name patriarchy, even while celebrating women in revolutionary movements. So this is part of what makes, for me, Raquel's work so essential. She makes clear that there can be no effective critique of or alternative to capitalism without a profound interrogation of the workings of patriarchy. This is what the new feminist movement in Latin America that really emerged beginning in 2015 has made so visible. And I think that this has really changed the political landscape and the landscape for thinking about autonomy in really deep ways that go far beyond what we might think of as the issues of the new feminist movement: abortion and reproductive rights, femicide and gendered forms of violence, labor, right? The new feminist movement, I think, is really so powerful and has had such broad impact on a hemispheric scale and a global scale, we could say, because it situates these issues in a much more holistic and integral analysis of social reproduction and collective life. And Raquel's work has been putting forth this kind of collectively forged analysis for more than 30 years now, with key concepts that are highlighted in the book, like the notion of politics and feminine and her insistent use on the plural feminine nosotras, The patriarchal pact is a fantastic concept of hers, alongside the idea of patriarchal mediation of relations and of society. The earlier notion of shared horizons of desire, and of course, the central notion of this book of the politics of the common. So these and other concepts from Raquel's work, while anchored elsewhere, anchored in Latin America, I think are absolutely relevant and urgent for the US context today. And I mean like today, on this very day, not only for feminist movements, but for all of the movements that are confronting the rise of fascism here. I think Raquel's work can really help us to think about and respond to these broad and very deeply material attacks on bodily autonomy and on critical thought that we're seeing in the interconnected attacks on reproductive rights and trans rights and attacks on spaces of education. Raquel's work also offers so much both conceptually, but also practically. And I think that that's really key here for not just confronting and refusing oppressive dominant systems, but crucially for that deep reflection and conceptualization of the relational dynamics that we build as we forge alternatives, right? And that is really central. In 2010, Raquel and I met for the first time in the space that's now home to Volcana, a beautiful social center and bookstore in Mexico City. If you haven't visited, please do. And she agreed to do an interview with me for my research project. I was wanting to learn more about the press that she had co-founded at the time called Pez en el Árbol. In that conversation, she told me about how she has always been directly involved in the publishing and printing work of every movement she's been a part of. At the time, a nerd studying book culture, I just thought that this was like kind of a cool detail of her militant biography. But later I came to realize the ways that this actually really represents the deep embodiment of the thesis that she's been developing for more than 4 decades, and which Brian beautifully picked up as the title for the interview that appears as chapter 1 of the book. There's no political autonomy without material autonomy. In that chapter, she elaborates on this point, insisting, and I think really importantly, that no political autonomy can sustain itself without symbolic autonomy, and that appears at the end of that interview. So this really points to the fact that how we make things, relations, and ideas matters, and how those things, ideas, and relations move in the world matters too. Raquel's simultaneous and really persistent attention, not just to the production of ideas, but also to caring for the relations and the materials that make those ideas move and take shape as action, I think is really testament to the grounding of her thesis. The digital project Ojala, which was mentioned earlier, which Raquel founded with Dawn, I think represents a really exciting new chapter in her longstanding work, not just as a militant theorist, but also as an editor and publisher herself. And a key element of Ojala, which is translation, brings me to the last very quick thing that I want to say. So in addition to all of the rich ideas that this book puts forth, I think that this book is a really clear example of why feminist translation matters and why it's an integral practice of feminist solidarity. So huge congratulations to JD, whose work I wasn't familiar with previously, and I was just really inspired and awed by this beautiful and carefully crafted translation, because translation is a political and material practice that is essential to the production and reproduction of autonomous and feminist movements. And I really want to give a shout out here to my friends in the collective Territorio de Ideas for helping me to really think through this more deeply. And I'll just close with a thought from our shared friend, Liz Mason-Dees, who insists that feminist translation is feminist internationalism. And I think that that is a kind of slogan that we can carry with us with this book as well. So I'll leave it here. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Magalí. We're going to turn things over now to Conor Coco Tomás Reed, who is a Puerto Rican Irish gender fluid scholar organizer of radical cultural and educational movements in the Americas and the Caribbean, and the author of New York Liberation School, Study and Movement for the People's University, which came out with Common Notions in 2023. At the CUNY Graduate Center, they are the 2023-25 visiting scholar at the Center for Place, Culture, and Politics, and they're on the board of directors for CLAGS, the Center for LGBTQ Studies. Coco is co-developing a quadrilingual anthology titled Black Feminist Studies in the Americas and the Caribbean, and is a contributing editor to the Lapis Journal and Lost and Found, the CUNY Poetics Document Initiative. warm welcome to Conor Coco.
All right. Can you all hear me okay? Okay. First, I just want to share immense respect to Raquel Gutiérrez Aguilar for your lifelong commitment to act and write through revolutionary movements across the hemisphere. Also, gratitude to Raquel and Brian for this incredible resource for our struggles, and to Dawn and Magalí for your powerful scholarship and activations. Very much so a fan of everyone who's here, and really inspired to be thinking alongside you all, and to everyone who's gathered here tonight. So for my contribution, I'd like to bring up 3 themes to reflect upon together for us to think about organization, place, and coalitions. So as Raquel documents in Defense of Common Life and Los Ritmos del Pachacuti, this organizational question of our movements is still very contested. So do we claim state power or conjure new forms of communitarian popular sovereignty? Do we commit to underground militancy on behalf of the people, or mass insurgent feminist care with the people? Raquel warns us that if taking over the state is the goal, quote, the systematic expropriation of collective energy is inscribed into the organization, which is then concentrated in a totally different political form that monopolizes and concentrates political decisions, end quote. So to keep that warning in mind. So in thinking about this warning, I want to invite us to resist this kind of gravitational pull of electoralism that we see across the hemisphere. So in the United States, where I'm based, and elsewhere, every 2 or 4 years, people are suddenly told that our political voices matter insofar as electing other people to make decisions on our behalf, and that we're otherwise told to sit back and be silent. So what does building a defense of common life mean with Donald Trump or Javier Milei's elections in this accelerated moment of neo-fascist aspirations? There's also this urgency of a precarious shared life on this planet. So what does a defense of common life look like as the global ecosystem is increasingly undergoing resource shortages, forced migrations, and tumultuous weather patterns? I think it's a difficult thing to consider that our movements in this moment are often siloed from each other, that they're often episodic and fleeting. So we can think about building better commoning infrastructure between our upheavals. So for example, where I'm based, between the 2020 abolitionist uprisings and the 2023 to 24 Stop Solidarity actions to stop the Israeli and US genocide in Gaza. So can we dream and act together to move from the symbolic to the concrete, to practice tangible material disruptions and tangible forms of radical care? So some examples of this: sabotaging weapons research on college campuses, obstructing weapons shipments at ports with dock workers, coordinating community blockades of ICE raids and deportations, and so on and so on. And Raquel reminds us that these must be repeated attempts, ongoing rehearsals of communitarian weavings. So let's keep practicing them together. I also now want to situate the place of transformation. So Raquel's work shows how in Bolivia in 2000 to 2005, direct actions to defend water and land from privatization converted a single limited zone of militant conflict into this larger social territorial strategy for popular democratic control. So we can also look in Brazil, where land and school occupations by the MST replaced state power with dual power formations. Or thinking about Oaxaca, Mexico, where in 2006, a teacher strike for unpaid wages evolved into this massive uprising against the state. So we see that movements emerging from schools, hospitals, other social institutions possess a built-in legitimacy towards wider insurgencies, which we also see in Argentina, Chile, Quebec, and elsewhere. Now, earlier this year, hundreds of university encampments were launched across the United States, as well as across Latin America and the Caribbean, to stop the Israeli and US genocide in Gaza. So we strategically changed public discourse in defense of Palestine while revealing the inadequacy of states and international bodies to confront the genocide. Perhaps another example of this patriarchal pact that Magalí had mentioned. So I invite folk who are gathered here to absorb these hard-earned communitarian lessons of Gaza solidarity encampments in the hemisphere including in places like Bolivia, Chile, Colombia, Mexico, and Puerto Rico, some lasting as long as 4 months in their creations, as other kinds of contemporary defenses of common life. So now thinking about coalitions. So I was really heartened to read Raquel's words that, quote, the production of the common is founded in a female we, a nosotras, and that this was beyond a collection of eyes into this collective figure that was much more potent. And this includes men and women, and I presume non-binary and trans people who reject the masculinist colonial capitalist order. And this reminded me of in Los Jurismos del Pachacuti, how you wrote of this specter of La Coordinadora, the coordinating body of the water and land defense movement that was misunderstood to be just one fearsome woman. So in this moment of intense ruptures, I want to invite us to think about how to also rupture our sense of apartness from each other so that we can become greater than individual existence while also holding each other's particularities as a source of differential strength. Forging new coalitional identities across our lives means also recognizing the kinds of coalitional identities that comprise our own selves. So we're often stuck in a kind of insular, frozen in time approach to tracing narrow lines of self-identification, thinking about one axis of race, another axis of gender, another axis of sexuality or class, and so forth. And I worry that this narrows our focus to a sole intersecting point of being. Thinking coalitionally, thinking about this nosotras, reveals how we're historically activated participants in the doing and in collaborating with each other. And so in difference, it's a kind of Venn diagram of the many different communities that are nestled inside of each of us and between us that we're accountable to. I want to lift up that earlier this year, the Lapis Journal that I'm proud to be a part of was thinking through very similar questions. And contributions by people like Ochi Curiel, Yuderquis Espinosa Miñoso, Veronica Gago, and Lucia Caballero were articulating this question of a we that was feminist, or a yo that was a colectivo yo, this kind of protagonism across the hemisphere. So I'm hoping that in this exchange tonight and onwards in our collaborations, that we can continue to reach across and syncopate our movements from one site to another to another. We very much have a world to transform, and I'm grateful to be alongside you all in doing it. So with that, I want to pass it on with a lot of gratitude to you all for being here.
Thank you so much, Coco, for that beautiful reflection. I'm sure we'll be picking up those threads in the conversation that we have over the rest of this event. I'd like to hand the mic over to Raquel Gutiérrez Aguilar with a great deal of gratitude, with a great deal of thanks for agreeing to allow this volume to come to life, and for all of the work and all of the example that your work has set for us, Raquel. Raquel is an organizer who has participated in numerous struggles and uprisings in Latin America over the last 4 decades. From the civil wars in Central America in the 1980s to indigenous uprisings in Bolivia, she's contributed to struggles both as an active participant and as a theorist of movement struggles, movement strategies, horizons, and possibilities. After spending 5 years in prison in Bolivia and energized by the water war in Cochabamba, Gutiérrez Aguilar returned to Mexico in 2001. Since then, she has experimented working with and alongside women in multiple ways, in autonomous organizations, social centers, publishing projects, in the academy, and most recently via journalism with the digital weekly Ojala.mx. Gutiérrez Aguilar is the author of the following volumes, all of which draw on her life experiences: A Desordenar, Desandar en el Laberinto, Cartas a mis hermanas más jóvenes, 1 and 2, the first of which came out in English as Letter to My Younger Sisters in 2023, She's also written about various struggles and political movements in The Rhythms of the Pachacuti, which, as previously mentioned, came out from Duke University Press in 2014, and also in Horizontes Comunitarios Populares in America Latina. And together with other comrades, she's compiled experiences and debates taking place among indigenous and communitarian struggles in a 3-volume series. So without further ado, Raquel Gutiérrez.
Well, really, really thank you very, very much to all of you, to Brian, to Dawn, Magalí, and Coco. Really thank you for all the things you have said, for reading my work, for all the things that you give back to me, letting me know that, that it is no useless doing all these things and keeping on in a struggle and trying to write and trying to reflect on the things that had happened and asking these things that are in the past, asking them what can we learn for the present, because we really need answers or more or less ideas or how to deal with this terrible present that we are dealing with. I really want to thank also Common Notions for the interest in publishing my work. And well, I really thank Dawn that made a question to me, because then I have a sting to go trying to organize my thinking. I feel this moment a moment. I feel times of a lot of desconcierto, chicos. How do you say that? Disconcert. I mean, that you really don't know what is going on, because nothing is exactly as you knew it was, but you don't really know how it is going or how it is getting different, and there are a lot of things so mixed up, and that the feeling when the neoliberalism was going on in his first wave, let's say, in Latin America in the late 70s and in the early 80s, more or less was the same. And I think that these moments are the moments of a deep capitalist offensive. We may call it fascist, we may call it authoritarian, or that's a debate there, how to exactly name it. But what I think that it's the content of what's going on, it's that things are changing on a capitalist mode, let's say, so that we are feeling, what we are feeling in this whole disconcert is that the things we knew are not so useful as they used to be. Because of this offensive, what we actually, that all the knowledge we had and the ways we were organized to do some things are kind of being pushed apart, kind of being defund or disorganized. So you don't really know what's going on. So we have to talk. We have to talk to each other, not on a way. And in Spanish, we say conversación, and the etymology of that word, I like it very much. It's conversare, that it means going around something together. Conversare means that, and a conversation should be that. But conversations sometimes have been formatted, for example, in academy, into this sequential talkings of people that are experts in something and that don't really want to listen or to talk to what the previous one said and to the next one. I mean, they just, in Bolivia, they say some expression that I like it a lot. They talk because they have a mouth, but they don't talk because they want to be heard, or because they want to enter any conversation. And I think that we really need conversation about what we know of all these changes that are being going on us and that are weakening the ways we have to sustain the struggles and to more or less deal with public items that were really important. Like, for example, when this happened, George Floyd was killed and this Black Lives Matter came into action in the United States, that was all this mobilization, etc. And a lot of people got involved into producing decision about important public items, like not being killed on the street by any white policeman that decides that you are a criminal. But nowadays, there's something changing, and we have all these white, arrogant men talking all the time and according us. I mean, I'm thinking about Trump, Musk, etc. I mean, all this cabinet, etc. And not only men, because lots of arrogant women too are taking words and saying things that are not useful for trying to make life a little bit commoner, a little bit more common, a little bit better, and transforming all these ways of exploiting, of expropriation, of domination that are making life something that is sometimes very, very tough, let's say. So, what I know about organizing conversations is this thing. And I'm going to start talking to what Magalí said and Coco said. What I know about that is that conversations have to be autonomous, flexible, and periodically. I mean, periodical, once a month, once a fortnight, twice a year. I mean, periodicity can vary, but it's very important that we gather, that some people gather together and talk together, and they get to know each other, and they listen to the things, and they think about what they have listened, and then they come back and they go around the problem again. And I think it's very important to be talking about, and in Spanish I would say a problem of the world, un problema del mundo. I mean, police killings, water, lack of water, destruction of forests. I mean, but it's not a thing about being thematic. It's a thing of starting from some point and then making the connections. But the thing has to be outside the people that are going to talk, because that's something very strange I find sometimes. When we try to make a nosotras, or perhaps if it's a non-binary person could say a nosotres, or if it's a male that is trying not to be, as I classify it, it's non-violent men that are men, at least, that recognize feminine authority, at least that, or others' authority, not only thinking about their own voice, I mean, hearing their own voice. So, talking about cosas del mundo, things of the word, problems of the word, delivers you to a very important question that, again, it's easier for me to say it in Spanish because I don't think that I can give the exact meaning. In Spanish, it is ¿qué queremos que pase? About something. So you have to tense diagnosis and wishes and desire and practice and capacity and organization. Not only diagnosis, but getting involved with something quite soon. In English, perhaps it would be what do we want to happen, but it's not exactly. Magalí, Dawn, perhaps you could help me making all this exact point about. Come on, open your mics and tell me, please, if you have any idea.
I mean, I would just translate it as what do we want to happen. It might not have the same resonance, but I think we can understand it that way. What do we want? We collectively want to take place. What is our horizon of desire?
Yeah, okay, thank you. In Spanish, as we have all these verbal times, it's kind of more precise, in my opinion. I mean, perhaps I can keep on thinking and say it in English sometime, but it's linking conversation to a practical question that gives you all this periodicity, this that we have to be seeing each other, we have to be talking to each other, because all this problem of an individual existence cannot be fought but with conversation and encounter. And that's something that it's on our hands to produce. And I mean, and asking others to come and see if they are interested. And another thing I know, being in all this business of struggling and of being defeated and then reorganizing and etc. for 40 years, as you have said, is that there are sometimes that you have to keep yourself, and there are times where you have to kind of make your desires small. And that doesn't mean that you have to do, that you don't have anything to do, or that you don't have something to do. Because there are a lot of things that you can do and that you have to do, but you have to learn when the struggle can be displayed and when it's going to be kind of replegada and nested in a smaller containers, let's say. I mean, well,
maybe like when the struggle is expanding and when it's kind of like retracting or like
retracting,
pulling back. Yeah.
Thanks, Dawn. So that's something that I could say to you, and that, well, Dawn and I have started this project about Ojala to sustain mainly a means of linking, of getting to know, and that perhaps we could continue some conversation through that way, or organize sometimes, talk about this kind of conversations and talk about our different experiences in organizing things and what has been okay, where have we had success and have got what we wanted, or etc., and when and how, and in what way. There have been so many problems in organizing that we couldn't really making it, go along. Well, thank you very much. That's what I could say, Brian, that as you are the one that organizes the thing. Thank you very much. And well, if there's any question or something.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Raquel. For all of those of you who are out there tuned in and watching, feel free to post a question or a comment or something, an issue that you'd like to raise in the comment section or wherever you see the chat on your screen, and we'll relay those comments and questions to everyone here in the event tonight. Perhaps maybe we could just start with if Dawn or Magalí or Coco, if you have something else you'd like to bring up, or a question, or another point you'd like to raise for Raquel. Well, you all are carefully reading your own Grundrissers. Maybe I might ask you, Raquel, kind of following up on what Dawn was kind of raising. For me, one of the things I think is so important about the work that you've done, and one of the things that we try to really highlight in this particular volume, is the way that your work thinks about how struggles for autonomy and against patriarchy combine. And one of the things we were thinking about with this book is that we wanted to make a book that would be a serious book that would present your work in a way that it deserves to be presented, but at the same time would be very accessible, so that the book could be picked up by people who have 60 years of organizing experience, or people who are just for the first time entering into movements and struggles. And I think the last year or so, at least in the US context, has really demonstrated that now is the time for people to be learning from your work, at least from my point of view, because we are witnessing a patriarchal reorganization of society, or an attempted patriarchal reorganization of society, to which autonomy is the only possible answer, it would seem like. And I was wondering if maybe you could just say a little bit more about where you're thinking about sustaining and extending practices of autonomy is today, or perhaps where you're thinking on how patriarchy and autonomous practices and their intersection, where they perhaps are today, globally, in the US, in this hemisphere, in Mexico, however you'd like to pick up the topic.
I would say that it's nowadays anti-patriarchal and autonomous struggles have to be even more linked. If we really see and take notice of the anti-feminism, the radical anti-feminism of the fascist, of the of this gang of rich men that are weird and that are going on, that they're going to govern us, and they're going to pick up all the decisions, and their decisions are going to be against us, against people, against women, against color people, against queer people. And we really have to think about that. there's always in the struggle this thing that it's a finality that goes against it, and that like a boomerang effect, let's say. Mm-hmm. It always happens like that, because as the struggle destabilizes what was organized in a way, then the ones that are moving, that are being pushed, etc., then they come back and ask for what they think they deserve. And we have to go on saying that they don't deserve that, and that we don't want them to be taking taking opinion on us. But as Coco was saying, the elections are something very, very, very problematic. Very, very, very problematic, because the elections are a means of disorganizing autonomous efforts, and they are organized periodically. So, well, we have to deal with that. So, how are we going to organize now that it's a very important moment, because elections are 4 years forward in the United States, let's say, and in Mexico 6 years. So we have that time, or let's say not 4, 3.5, or 4 months. How do we use that time to organize the conversations and to deal with the main problems we have, and trying to I think that we are going really to we're going to have to stop and mobilize soon, I guess, against some of the most dangerous things that they can decide. I cannot imagine what they are going to decide, but their decisions are going to be problematic and dangerous, and we are going to we will have to mobilize. So how are we going to do that? That's, for example. And the problem is that precarity is extending also, and that we are having less time to organize, because we are having we have to use a lot of time to work and to get a salary and to get some means, etc. So how are we going to make time for us, to grab time for us? In the feminist revolt in South America mainly, or in Mexico too, when young girls asked, what are we, they asked me a question that was very interesting, because they said, you are always talking about that there is a material dispute. So what we are disputing, they asked me, some Argentinas, very, very young girls, and they say, we are disputing time. The time to organize, the time to talk, the time to write the things that we want, the time to make all these conversations we need, etc. And we really need to dispute time, and then decide what to do with the time. Because exactly, you have to, and Magalí said it, Magalí insisted that we build and we struggle as we build, and as we build, we struggle, etc. But to build and to struggle, we need time to do that. And what is going on with our time? How are we being governed by all these platforms that are intensifying risks, etc.? I mean, say no. Young people, say no, and face some consequences, let's say, because we really need to do that. We really need to stop all this machine that goes accelerating and grabbing our time, our lifetime, inhabilitating us to build the things we need and to struggle upon those things that we have built, making our own struggles in the sense we need, we want, etc. I really don't know anything else to say, because the question was kind of broad, and well.
That's great. Thank you so much, Raquel. We've got a question in the two questions in the chat. I'm just going to kind of fold them into giving them to you as one question, because they're both thinking about contemporary struggle from different points of view. And Anna Martina asked what your thoughts on this idea about, in the global South, how we just have to resolve things because we almost never have the resources, and how organizers here in the US are struggling so hard right now with the possibility of nonprofits being potentially shut down by the government. Like, what is the opportunity to radicalize movements from different perspectives or tactics? And then in the chat, we have Andreas, who asks, what kinds of lessons should we take from militant worker anti-colonial movements, and what kinds of defenses or networks should our organizations build towards a true popular struggle?
Mhm. The first question, I think that for example, I don't know in United States or in Canada, but in Mexico and down in the South, sometimes the NGOs help a little and damage a lot. I mean, they have a kind of contradictory way of staying, because almost always they are quite colonial. I mean, they come with their agendas, they came with their ways of working, they decide how to, they establish the times, etc. So it's a problem, it's problematic for some that NGOs in Latin America are going to be closing, etc., but not so problematic, because they're going to be, I mean, if they don't talk so loud as they talk based on the money they get, they are going to permit that another voices start being listened, because nowadays they kind of go over them. I don't know if I make myself clear. I mean, if I can, I'm making the idea clear. I wouldn't be afraid of not having money. I would be afraid of not having time and not having health, or not having friends to organize with. I mean, because if you have the ability to sustain all these links, and you kind more or less share with them, talk with them, etc., you can make purposes with them. And then, of course, you need some money, but as money goes and comes. That's what we are experimenting in Ojala, don't we, Dawn? I mean, really, and we kind of can deal with it until now. And about the anti-colonial movements, there's something very, very important from the anti-colonial movements that I would really love to be talking about, and it's the problem of the nation state, because the anti-colonial movements, or a lot of anti-colonial movements, tried in some years of history to organize their own state, their own nation state, and that is a problem. That is really, really, really very problematic, because nation state is the means of capital accumulations at the first hand. So it's anti-colonial thought, anti-colonial struggle, in the way they reject the colonial way of thinking, the colonial way of ruling, the colonial decisions, etc. I think that is very, very important. But in that moment when anti-colonial struggle becomes a positive affirmation on a nation state, there are a lot of problems there. And well, the problem is that is the kind of problem that we go on and on getting in it. I mean, so perhaps talking about that should be very important because what we have to do now, I think, is preparing and getting the strength to deliver, to expand our struggles in the moment that will come when all this offensive kind of passes down, because it's going. I mean, all this wind that we are feeling now, like a hurricane, it's not going to last. I mean, it comes, it stays, it changes, it makes bad things for us, and then it goes. I mean, or it stabilizes, and then it's our time. So getting to know what times are you living in and what are the rhythms of your own capacity and of your own of your own capacity is perhaps some of the most important things that we should not lose. And well, I don't know, but I think that I'm kind of tired of speaking in English or trying to make my ideas in English.
Thank you so much, Raquel. Yeah, that's you're doing. It's very understandable, everything that you're saying, and we very much appreciate the effort to communicate with everyone out there on the call. Perhaps maybe we might have time if there's a question from someone on the panel, something maybe you would like to ask Raquel to maybe tie things up for us. Doesn't maybe need to tie things up. Perhaps it could open things out. Whatever.
I would like to ask you what you are doing, but we need another hour for that, or another hour and a half. So let's make that time for us in January. And I really would love to talk to you, to you four, or a little some more, and we could organize a conversation.
Agreed. Yeah, it's been a lovely conversation so far, and it's opened up a lot of interesting threads. And also, I think what you were saying at the beginning, Raquel, of the need to have the periodic conversation, and really putting the emphasis on the circulation of speech and exchange and the social relations. As being kind of the key thing of weathering this particular storm, this hurricane. I think very much resonates, and absolutely we will definitely organize another conversation amongst all of us. Does anyone have Coco, I think maybe, or Dawn, did you have something you wanted to jump in with? Please go ahead.
I just want to share again, mil gracias y respeto inmenso. I know that there are various threads that are here, and really honored that people tuned in tonight, that we put out the call and that you heard that call to gather tonight. Want to reflect on just a couple of pieces. One is just that we are really just at the tip of this incredible kind of reinvention of struggle that's happening in Latin America and the Caribbean. And I invite people to take this as an opportunity to learn more about and to become more involved in solidarity wherever you are. I think that in the Americas and the Caribbean, there is this real challenge to earlier examples of militancy, the armed struggle or the taking of state power, that now often the far right is using as their tactics. And instead, there's this kind of blossoming counter-militancy of feminist and queer and anti-colonial struggles that are thinking about the very different terms of what militancy looks like, thinking about direct care, about solidarity, of mutual aid, of really trying to challenge the existence of colonial and patriarchal state power in these very inventive ways. I'm thinking about this question of anti-colonial struggles and the nation state, and something to consider is, thinking about the Mapuche struggle in the Southern Cone, or even thinking about the Palestinian struggle, that when we're talking about resisting colonization and having a nation be the goal, I hope that in our movements that we can also be thinking about what a kind of liberatory horizon looks like, that where Palestine is not just one terrain, but to use the slogan of the streets, that Palestine is everywhere, or that the Mapuche struggle is everywhere. And I think also, when we're talking about how to situate ourselves in this time, we have our own kinds of traditions to really challenge the kind of rhythms of capital. We have March 8th, May 1st, we have June 3rd, the Bangladeshi student uprising, they have July 36th, right? They're reinventing the calendar through their struggles. And so I think just an opportunity to really think about that there are these tumultuous winds that Raquel had mentioned, but in some ways we have these inherited energies of many, many generations of people who have been on the path of liberation that are also, that wind is behind our backs. So I hope this is not one, but many conversations that we can have. And I want to invite if the Compas wanted to share a piece upon concluding, but a lot of gratitude to you all.
Thanks. Well, I'll just say a few words. I've been thinking a lot about the sort of the appearance of a contrasting moment right now between Mexico and the United States. So, in Mexico, we have the appearance of a feminist president who has been making all these statements over the past couple of weeks about how she disagrees with the criminalization of migration, for example. But there's actually a lot less tension, I think, in practice between what's taking place in Mexico under Sheinbaum and in Biden's United States, and soon to be under Trump. Just thinking through specifically around migration, like on the first day she took office, there was an army killing of 6 migrants in Chiapas. Since then, there's been another such killing. 40 migrants were burned to death in a prison in Ciudad Juarez, and the person responsible is not facing any kind of justice. And that is under Sheinbaum, right? Like, she is continuing the policies, super draconian policies of previous administrations, but the discourse is different. And I think that's one of the things that Raquel has really helped me, and Raquel and others like Silvia Rivera Cusicanqui, who has this wonderful idea of magical words that these leaders will use, these political leaders will use to sort of convince us, to bring us in. And I feel like that's what's happening with Sheinbaum right now. There's like this idea that there's going to be tension, that there's going to be difference with the United States with Trump policies. And I think we're actually, unfortunately, going to be seeing a lot more continuity than what anyone wants to acknowledge, even from the Mexican administration. But at the same time, like, it's just in thinking through feminist movements in both places, which are also sometimes connected at different junctures, or, there's movement between them around, for example, ensuring access to abortion with pills for people who need it. That has been something that feminists in Mexico have been like really at the forefront of over the past years, and is becoming increasingly work that is happening in the States, but also that we're at a moment where there is an increased danger of co-optation because we have, someone who's sometimes identified as a feminist in power in Mexico. And then you have this sort of reverse in the States. So you have this like very anti-feminist, rabidly anti-woman, anti-trans, anti-queer anti, everything president who, and this is something Brian and I were like tossing around the other day, is likely to foment more of an independent feminist movement than maybe previously has existed in the United States, separate from power, separate from institutional feminism, separate from enshrined like NGO-y feminism, which, was also a process that took place in Mexico, right? So that the overflowing of institutional feminism by younger women, trans, non-binary, queer people is what has created this movement that now exists in Mexico. They had to overflow the instituted feminism. So, there's a lot of, I'm super freaked out right now, and I think a lot of us are, about what's coming. But there's also potential openings in this moment, and I think really important spaces for like ongoing exchange and learning. And I just like I love Raquel, and I just love the sort of concreteness of saying, okay, so what we need to do is actually we just need to talk to each other and be in conversation and try to continue these conversations over time. And that the winds will also change, but the organizing has to keep going no matter what way the wind is blowing. And we're learning that with like, the progressive government in Mexico right now as well. So anyways, thank you all very much.
All right, I suppose I'll take my turn. Brian says yes. Just briefly, I just really want to highlight this idea of time, because I think that this is something I'm thinking about constantly. It's something I have to think, we all have to think about, but I have to think about, like, I feel like extra as the parent of 2 young kids, like parenting makes time all the more compressed, and every second is not your own, like literally no seconds are your own. And that is something that has allowed me to push back against like the capitalist pressures of my workplace, right? Because I say, well, I just don't like, there is a limit to the time I'm available to you, boss, right? And that no, that Raquel raised, the idea of that, thinking about time and the power of saying no and the potential risks that are associated with that. And I think that that's something that we should have really front and center as we're kind of moving into this next phase of collective thought, conversation, and struggle, is to not fall into, I think, the real patriarchal trap of self-exploitation, right? And of exploiting each other, and of exploiting those who care for us in the name of liberatory work, right? Because I think that that is such an easy trap to fall into, and I have done it, and we all, I think, are constantly grappling with that. So I think that that for me is really front and center. And yeah, like Dawn was saying, going back to that conversation, right? That conversation and linking conversation to a practical question, as you said, Raquel, like problems of the world, right? We've started convening a very tiny neighborhood assembly here in our like tiny neighborhood, thinking about the threat of mass deportation and what that means for our particular neighborhood here in Portland with a really large immigrant population, and my kids' school, and these various spaces. So that is like this very, very specific, really, really local thing that's tied to this national threat. Thinking about it in just the care that I can offer to my trans students, right? Those problems of the world and how the power of those, of building and sustaining conversation around those. So I think in some ways the kind of threat to the nonprofit sphere, that has been a space where so much amazing energy and so many amazing people have been absorbed into. So, perhaps being forced to think about alternatives to that being the place that you do radical work. I mean, we know that it's not, but it also is for a lot of people, right? The place where you formalize that work and it becomes a livelihood potentially, which is also important, right? To understand that we all do need to live and pay bills, even if we don't want to. Those are some scattered thoughts, perhaps not very coherent, but on the what are we doing right now. So thank you all so much. This was a fantastic space, and I very much look forward to continuing the conversation.
Thank you so much, Coco and Magalí and Dawn, for those final reflections. Raquel, you've already given us so much, but it would perhaps be unjust to not give you an opportunity just to say one final word if you would so desire.
I just want to thank you, Brian, because your work has been very, very well done. I mean, as Dawn said, you are the first person that has read all my work. I mean, I I was amazed. All the things I've written, he picked them. You're a good scholar, and that's a good thing to do. and it was very interesting for me to be, that you organized that interview and that you picked up these two pieces, then translate them and did all that edition work, no? But as I think Coco was saying, we have a world to transform, so we really have a lot to talk among us. And in translation, as we say in Ojala, it's perhaps better in translation. Okay, thank you.
Absolutely, yeah. Thank you so much, Raquel. And I just want to say we started with the importance of producing public decisions and the way that this conversation moved as a kind of, attempt at making sense and taking, picking up lines of thoughts together. It was very unexpected, but also incredibly beautiful. So I just want to say thanks so much to Coco and to Dawn and to Magalí for participating, for taking the time to be here. Thanks to Malav and to Ana Martina for making the space for us. Thanks to all of you out there who are joining us in the public for this event. And just one last thanks to Raquel for all of the work and all of the solidarity that you've expressed with this project. So let's continue to converse. Let's continue to seek each other out. Let's continue to encounter one another and build these social relations as we weather the contemporary storm. Thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Thank you.